Well, after years of neglect, it looks like Marvel and DC Comics may have actually found a way to destroy superhero comics. Superhero comics may have finally met their kryptonite. All right, before we get into this article, if you want to support my work, collegeofthedead.com, where college costs you an arm and a leg. Also at epicmermaids.com, you can sign up for The Mermaids. It's my full-color ongoing series about mermaids. ICV2, here we go. What are you talking about? Superhero comics may have finally met their kryptonite. All right, let's get into it. Last week, ICV2 and Comic-Con released their annual market data on North American comics and graphic novel sales, with bittersweet news that sales rose a booming 11% between 2018 and 2019, a performance they think is going to be hard to repeat. Yes, because a lot of stores have been closed. According to their analysis, a majority of the record 1.21 billion sales came from graphic novels, particularly kid-oriented titles sold through bookstores, online retailers, and online. There's details to this. I've covered it a little bit. What it basically says is, first of all, we're going to include manga, which they've never done before in these sales. So sales are down overall, especially when you take out manga sales, Japanese language reprint stuff. And, you know, there's also a lot of sales through Scholastic book fairs, and digital sales were not doing so well. But Scholastic book fair sales, adding in manga sales, why is Scholastic a big deal? Why does it kind of not count? Scholastic doesn't really count because Scholastic, they just throw books in catalogs, and they're sold direct to consumer through bake sales, like buying those cookies from Girl Scouts. You know, no one really necessarily wants them per se. They're just kind of forced through the channel, and the kids have to kind of buy something. So they buy some books. So a larger and larger percentage of these sales are not actually accountable to people who really, love comics, love superheroes, love the genre. It's just jammed through libraries. The big news from the survey confirmed they're even including crowdfunding, which is like crowdfunding is none of your business. Crowdfunding is outside of all the normal distribution and marketing systems. So they should not be including crowdfunding whatsoever in that 1.2 billion figure. The big news from the survey confirmed earlier hints that we saw back earlier in the ICV2 conference at New York Comic Con in October 2019, showing that not only a shift from the direct market to the trade book channel, but also a shift in format from periodicals to graphic novels. What he's talking about is a shift from the direct market to the trade book channel. Direct market is comic book stores. There used to be something like 10,000 comic book stores in the 1990s, even more than that. Now there's less than 2,000. There may be as little as 1,200 that are dedicated comic book stores, and of those, maybe 200 or 300 that are substantial business operations. There's also been an increase in direct-to-consumer sold through mail-order operators, and these mail-order operators are usually deep discounting, or kind of always deep discounting, from anywhere from 30 to 50% off cover price. So there's kind of no reason to be buying comics, especially periodical comics, directly through comic book stores anymore, unless you want to, quote, support your local comic book store, which is a nice thing to do, but it's almost like charity. They've really destroyed the business channel. The trade book channel he's talking about is basically sales through bookstores, sales through Amazon, and those kind of book sales, yes, they've done well, and it's because they're collecting older, more successful material. That's the things that people want to buy. The new material people haven't been as interested in. And with respect to periodicals, there are a lot of things. Periodicals just basically means regular, monthly, single saddle-stitched floppy comics. Sometimes they publish them more frequently, sometimes even less frequently, but he's talking about single comic book sales. With single comic book sales, a lot of the content has been changed. First of all, there's a lot of problems with single comic book sales, and I'm going to do a separate video on that. I found a great article about it. Let's get back to this cool article. At that time, I wrote at Forbes that these dynamics portended an even bigger change to the fundamental character of the comic book market in the U.S., away from superheroes that have driven sales for decades and towards manga and kids comics that appeal to a younger and more diverse audience. Reaction to this piece was fairly empathic, since the suggestion of a move away from superheroes sounds like the end of the world as we know it to a certain demographic of readers and retailers. End of the world as we know it. He's talking. This is his article. Surprising new data shows comic readers are leaving superheroes behind. The thing is this: if the comics that they're producing are bad superhero comics, if there are too many of them to ever hope to be able to purchase, because they just keep producing more and more and more and more individual titles. If they're doing things like this when they're trying to sell your product, they're saying, this is coming from the independent. Now that we've got female Thor, okay, a female Thor, because they're creating a female version of Thor. They did it in the comics back in like 2014. Now they're doing it in the new Thor movie. Let's topple every pale, male, and stale superhero character we can see. Yeah, so that's good rhyming. That's definitely points for rhyming. But the thing is, attacking the characters, changing the characters, telling people, like I go to Wendy's, I like their chicken sandwich. I get a plain grilled chicken sandwich. Honey mustard on the side. I go there. When I go there, I expect it to be a certain thing, and that's what I look forward to. That's the goodwill that they've built with me, that I know I can go to that Wendy's, and actually just about any Wendy's, and pretty much get a good quality, consistent meal. That's what I'm looking for when I go to Wendy's. That's why I don't just say, like, you know what, let me just stop at Burger King. Let me just stop at this random restaurant, and or maybe I'll have this random pizza I've never tried before at this unusual little store. Like, you want to get what you're expecting to get. If you don't expect to get it, if you can't expect to get it, you destroy the franchise. So why would I consistently go back to Wendy's expecting a chicken sandwich, grilled chicken with honey mustard on the side, plain, if it's going to come out as a fish sandwich occasionally because KT Roborts wants to change my meals? That's the destruction of their franchises. That's what they used to be so serious and concerned about, like back at Marvel, particularly in the 1980s when Jim Shooter was editor-in-chief. His focus was protecting the franchises, protecting the brands. There were things that he could not let writers do with the characters because they were licensed. And it was one thing that you protect the integrity of the comic books for the respecting the fans and the consumers, but also for licensors, licensees, who, they license Spider-Man. They don't expect all of a sudden that Spider-Man's going to be a different character, because it's the stories that drive the franchise, that drive the interest. And that's why someone wrote a check and said, yes, I want to invest in producing merchandise based on this character, or why fans spend their hard-earned money on pursuing a character, because they're interested in getting that chicken sandwich that I like and expect. And if they don't get it, it's going to damage the franchise, because some people are going to say, like, oh, I love this new weird fish sandwich you gave me instead of the chicken sandwich that I was expecting. But most people are going to say, no, it's I wanted the chicken sandwich. Reaction to this piece was fairly empathic. Okay, great. Good for him. The loyalty loop collapses, which is what I just explained. First of all, this outcome was both over-determined and a long time coming. Superheroes rose to dominance. This has nothing to do with them rising to dominance in the 60s and 70s. But let's continue. When comics were cheap and there was relatively less competition for kids' attention, a new generation of creators in the 70s and 80s up-leveled the storytelling in superhero comics, introducing complexities, themes, and world-building techniques designed to appeal to the older readers who gravitated to comic shops. Well, there was always continuity in comic books, where the characters were the same, literally the same effing people from issue to issue. They didn't say, like, oh, well, you like Spider-Man? Well, he's a different guy now. He's a different thing now. He's a different life experience person. We're going to change his age. And now the whole story changes because it's a different person. So that's one aspect of storytelling that was consistent, that people were expecting. But another aspect was continuity, where when things happened, there was a timeline that was being followed and it actually made some logical sense. Collecting old storylines for trade book distribution was relatively rare, so fans had to buy piles of issues and back issues to get the whole story. Yes, that's true. There were not collections of older stories. You had to go find the back issues if you wanted to read them, and also you concentrated on the new material, which was always kept to a certain level of quality and consistency, like a chicken sandwich from Wendy's, that you could depend on. Yes, you know what I'm getting for lunch today. Add all that together and you've got the makings of a great business selling relatively respectable fantasy and superhero work to a small, loyal group, well, it wasn't that small, of readers and collectors with disposable income and deep sentimental attachment to the content. Well, no, it wasn't that small. It was a growing, successful audience. And in the early 1990s, it grew so large that Marvel was sold to an investor. Well, it was the late 1980s. He was sold to an investor for $80 million. And then the company kept doing more and more and more business, Marvel Comics. Disney ultimately bought Marvel for $4 billion, which now is seen as like a very low price. But in the early 1990s, comics were booming when they were produced in this way. Booming. That's when they had 10,000 stores. Now there's less than 2,000. So, kind of do the math. I'm sure nearly everyone reading this knows the story inside and out, which is in itself part of the problem. The comics industry, publishers, retailers, readers, and collectors all over learned the lessons of this era and kept repeating the same formulas over and over again in the face of massive evidence the market was changing. No, that's what are you talking about? As the quality slid and as the continuity was taken out of comics, even when comics started to be kind of cool in the 1990s, unfortunately, people forgot about quality storytelling. They had very exciting artwork in a lot of the books, but quality storytelling was left behind, unfortunately, with the success of really, honestly, Image Comics. Very, very cool opportunity for artists, very cool opportunity for creators to own their own work and build their own empires and businesses. But a lot of it was at the expense of high-quality storytelling. Now, a lot of that returned, good storytelling, a lot of great writers coming in and all that, but just the same, a lot was destroyed when there was no more editorial focusing on the hottest selling books, making sure that the stories made a heck of a lot of sense. Because that's the franchise. The art, you can always follow the artist, and the artists are incredible, but if you don't have great storytelling and consistently watch the story, it ultimately can fade away. Spawn is an example of something that Todd McFarlane has focused on and done incredibly well with, and he's got the storytelling right. But ultimately, a lot of other Image titles that were successful years ago were not able to continue, and a lot of properties were sold off, and that's a shame. DC, but the success for Todd McFarlane is fantastic. DC and Marvel wasted the better part of 2 decades between 2000 and 2020 failing to react to these changes strategically or incrementally. Given the choice between making an authentic play for a wider, younger audience or trotting out this year's version of the same tired cliches, reboots, and events, the big two constantly opted for the latter. Well, they tried all sorts of things. But the thing is, when you say that there's massive evidence that the market was changing, there was massive evidence that the quality was changing, and that there was no market for poor quality projects. By the time they made some cursory efforts to adjust to the changing of tastes of younger readers, they trained 2 generations of fans to resist all change and reject anything that appeared to retreat from the dominant style of overdrawn, how dare they? That's plain stupid. Overwritten, overwrought. Wow. Okay. Well, hey, everyone's entitled to an opinion. Apparently everyone's got one. But, doing things like turning male characters into women, which you're not even allowed to say publicly anymore, really, without being called a hate group, was stupid. The idea to try to push, look at this. I mean, female Ghostbusters was a disaster because no one wanted it. And, they tried to make excuses. This is them being upset. They tried to make excuses that it was related somehow to politics. It's like, you have to make something appealing. If you give me an uncooked frozen chicken sandwich when I want my Wendy's chicken sandwich, I'm not going to eat it. I'm not going to like it. And if people just don't like it, they don't like it. Now there's a reboot coming for Ghostbusters, right? And now the people who rebooted Ghostbusters prior to this with these female characters are upset that it doesn't have continuity with them. Like, well, what do you want? Like, you didn't have continuity when you put this stuff out and nobody liked it. So why would there be references to these characters? Of course they're going to, like I'm going to, delete it and wipe the slate clean because it's garbage. People didn't like it. And the thing is, it may have even been well done, wasn't, but even if it were well done, if people don't like it, they don't like it. There isn't no big market change where someone's saying, "Well, we have different tastes now." It's like, no, it's not that there are different tastes. There are different things that you're trying to get people to like that they just don't like. Marketing doesn't work that way. Back to the article. The trade collection well runs dry. As the market shifted decisively towards trade collections as the format of choice, publishers at first were able to monetize their huge back catalog of classic storylines, along with current story arcs that were purpose-built for collected editions. Yeah, so the periodicals started to get designed to be featured as trade paperbacks, and then, of course, customers were started to being trained to say, like, well, you can go chase the individual periodicals, or you can just wait until the graphic novel comes out, collecting it. Like, so why prioritize chasing around getting the periodicals as a consumer? They didn't. So obviously that was going to cost them business, and it did. Certainly did. But as the supply of quality material started to dry up, few new storylines measured up to must-read status, even less so because constant reboots of the story universes left a lot of material outside of current continuity, and there's no continuity in new comics. It's horrific. Absolutely horrific. And that is something that costs them tremendous potential business. But it takes discipline and understanding of how to create high-quality editorial and how to weave storylines together and settings together and do it appropriately. It takes a lot of focus, and I haven't seen it done in decades. And therefore irrelevant to exactly the most dedicated habitual readers that superhero publishers need. They're just not producing them right. We also discovered fairly into the superhero movie and media era that success on the big screen and the small screen or the gaming console didn't translate to sales of ongoing titles, even in those rare cases where publishers tried to align the stories in the comics to the expectations of the massive media audience. Because it wasn't planned. They were planned separate. And if you go and you see, Thor in the movie theater, and this is going back 6 years now that they made a female Thor, and you see a cool Chris Hemsworth Thor, that's what you're expecting if you go into the comic stores, and then they don't have that. They don't have something that dovetails with what's actually successful. No. So if they don't have it, well, and it's just weird, and it's not well done in comics, and it relates not at all to the movies, what do you expect is going to happen? People aren't going to buy that. It's just not appealing. It's simple math that if superheroes were losing fans who'd come in during the 70s, 80s, and 90s and not replacing them with young blood when they aged out, the genre, at least in comics publishing, was on borrowed time, and it was especially unhelpful when diehard old-time fans chose to see every effort to appeal to the tastes and values of younger readers as some kind of political conspiracy or, at best, clumsy, unwelcome reminder that the world they knew was changing around them. Well, it's the forced diversity narrative, and it's a correct narrative. Like, you can't expect, quote, diehard old-time fans, which equals actual customers who expect their Wendy's chicken sandwich to taste good, and then say, no, we're going to now give you soy chicken. Like, I'm not eating your soy chicken. I'm not interested in it, and I'm not here to help you try to force soy chicken on the world because somehow you think that's a good idea. The world is not changing around anyone. There are people that want to push social agendas, and that's fine, but it doesn't mean that you're going to create compelling products. And if you don't create compelling products, no one you're trying to push them on is actually going to buy them, and they don't. And that's where the business has fallen apart. Otherwise, you would see, unlimited superhero universes of real whatever, their version of what they think a superhero should be. And it would be hugely successful as opposed to failing, as this article admits. Moving backwards while others move forwards. What's remarkable is how the rest of the business has changed to the point where comics were an exciting publishing success story last decade, despite the decrepit state of its core genre, superheroes. Manga, for example, has grown triple digits since the 2011 market trough. And while most superhero comics have not been able to get much lift out of the billions worth of media air cover, the popularity and sales of manga is driven directly by the prevalence of new anime on cable and streaming services. Well, yeah, and also the huge prevalence of the destruction of traditional superheroes and traditional superhero storytelling To the point of ridiculous. I mean, to the point of Thor wasn't the first wacky thing they did. But I'm sure if you go back to 2010 and you start looking at changes that Marvel was doing with their characters, you're going to see, back then is when people started abandoning more and more of the Marvel titles for manga, which is now very available. Then there's the kids market. Well, DC and Marvel studiously neglected younger readers for what must have seemed like good reasons back in the 2000s and 2010s. Every other corner of the publishing industry seems to have gotten the memo that kids, tweens, and teens love to read. I mean, yeah, but I mean, they did actually focus on creating a multi-billion-dollar franchise with the whole Marvel studio thing. So kind of like that's a bit of a distraction. And the licensing for Marvel has been tremendous. So really, their niche within Disney, because of course Marvel is owned by Disney, their whole niche is supposed to be creating a boys product of superheroes. That's why Bob Iger said they bought them, was for the boy franchise. And they spent $4 billion on it. So you'd figure like, well, I guess we'll focus on this. So that's what they were supposed to be doing. And that's what they were kind of doing. And Marvel Publishing is not really separate at all from what they're trying to serve for the movie and TV and game and licensing franchises. So probably a good idea for them to be focused on developing those projects, don't you think? Because if they're not, and they're just saying like, all right, well, let's make some kids products for tweens, they can't even make their own Marvel comics. How are they going to make marketable projects for kids and tweens and teens? Give them prose books and they will read them faster than authors can churn out sequels. Well, they do have prose books. Same with graphic novels. There's no reason those graphic novels couldn't have been superhero-based rather than original properties, except for the fact that the owners of the most popular superhero IP had no interest in either producing kid-oriented comics or licensing it out. Well, they did license out all ages comics to IDW to produce Spider-Man, and so this guy's just not up on that. That wasn't silly in the short run. It created a bigger problem down the line. Oh my God. A whole generation has grown up loving Reina and Dav and Kazu, not just the creators of the titles, but the aesthetic and the atmosphere out of that kind of work, which, in case you haven't noticed, is about as far from the house look of DC and Marvel as it's possible. Okay, there is no house look at Marvel and DC. That's why I had to pause for a second. That's the other thing that was destroyed in the late 1980s when Jim Shooter left Marvel Comics as editor-in-chief and allowed Todd McFarlane to have his huge success with Spawn. He let Todd McFarlane was allowed to draw Spawn the way that Todd McFarlane wanted to promote himself. And Todd was brilliant for pushing and pulling that off. But Jim Shooter would have never on this planet ever let the Image guys showboat on established Marvel-branded characters. And they were allowed to. And that was the end of the house style. It has nothing to do with the house look of DC and Marvel. There is no house look of DC and Marvel. There hasn't been for decades. Those readers are now aging up to a more sophisticated original graphic novels, creating a bonanza for various imprints of Hachette, Penguin, Random House, and others who can now smell the money. Yeah, bonanza. Barring a few curious folks who check out the DC and Marvel shelf because they like the movies, that generation is never going to feel the same bond with superhero comics as their elders. Well, look, you got to produce the content. The genre is not the content. You can make a superhero book, but it's if you want people to feel a bond with it. Where does a bond come from? Quality storytelling. Actually, yes, a house look creates a bond. It creates a visual aesthetic. Nobody was as good as this as Jim Shooter as he did with Valiant 1.0. Excellent storytelling. Like, the story really makes sense, and the character progresses over a planned amount of time. Continuity with a line of titles. Yes, an actual line where you have ongoing series and interrelated characters. It fills out missing voids and gets people invested in the look and the aesthetic of the line of the comics that are being produced. There are many facets to it. As I wrote earlier this year, they may retain the comic buying habits into adulthood, but they lack the training that past generations had. Continuity. Boy, I want to really have a conversation with this guy. Collectability and canon. Collectability. Okay. Canon. There's no collectability if people aren't interested in buying the comics. The only thing that creates collectability is that people who have the product love it. They love the comic. They don't want to give it up. And then new people discover the comic. And then they say, hey, I want that comic that I missed a year ago. Well, that's fine. But you're going to have to pay someone more money than their love for that comic. Now you have collectability. Canon is when you have consistency. And frankly, when you're turning your characters into this, this mess, there's no canon. How is there going to be canon when you take the Ghostbusters and turn them into this bunch? You can't. There is no history. Canon means history and continuity. They're therefore much less likely to fall for the usual tricks that publishers will have used to keep those readers on the hook month after month. They've also endured a lot of gatekeeping, condescension, and abuse from self-appointed comic traditionalists, I guess like me, which probably doesn't make the delights of old school fandom seem very appealing. Good comics are good comics. That's it. There's not that much to it. And good is not your whatever agenda there is that you're going to put into stories. That's good if your purpose is to create changing agendas. It's like if you want a good story has certain attributes to it. Good art, good storytelling, continuity, actual collectability, and canon. These have specific attributes to them, whether we like it or not. And if you don't execute on that level, you're not going to be producing stuff that's going to last the test of time. That's it. The long twilight. All the factors pointing to the market decline of superhero comics is like one of those Agatha Christie mysteries where there are too many sets of prints on the murder weapon. Okay, look, maybe we will revive superhero comics in the right way. Maybe we won't. Maybe I'll do it. I published a line of continuity-based ongoing science fiction series in the mid-1990s. There were rough times. We weren't able to continue. It was called Triumphant Comics. The best known one is Adam Polina's Chromium Man that he did for me. Great, great work. It was very difficult. It's not easy to produce that. It takes a massive, massive effort. I'm considering it. In the meantime, thanks for checking out this video. Definitely subscribe, click the bell for notifications. Give me in the comments below what you think of this article. If you want to support College of the Dead, that would be fantastic. It's where college costs you an arm and a leg. There is continuity in our stories, and we're on the third book in this series. So you can get there at collegeofdead.com and sign up for epicmermaids.com. You'll get on the free email list for The Mermaids, and you'll find out when that book comes out. Also very well written. Lots of continuity. 30 characters. There is a whole self-contained universe that we created and executed on. Fantastic, fantastic team that I collaborated with to do this. And really, that is what it takes. You need a team of people that are committed to making something great. That's how you produce a line of successful stuff that's going to last forever. All right, I'll see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.